All right, what is Mike Stoops talking about? I'm going to get y'all the actual quote here from Mike Stoops, Kentucky's coach, who had much to say about Georgia and buying players, something that is, discussed behind the scenes and has been for some time. But this is what the Kentucky coach had to say on Monday in a coach's show. He said, "I can promise you, Georgia, they bought some pretty good players. You're allowed to do that these days, and we could use some help. That's what they look like. You know what I mean? When they have 85 of them, I'd encourage anybody that's disgruntled to pony up some more. And I'll explain a little bit further about Kentucky and all of this. But Matt, your reaction initially?
Well, I think what triggered a lot of people was just the term buying players.
Yeah.
What he means is using NIL to bring in players, and the different ways that teams are doing that, because there are no exact rules or regulations. It's whatever you can do to get these kids and keep them happy, whether it's through high school or through the transfer portal. Teams are using that. It's legal now, but to say buying players, I definitely think raised a lot of eyebrows. But if you're Mark Stoops, you have to. That was a message to their fan base. Hey, y'all finally want to beat Georgia every once in a while. Do you ever want to compete for, in the SEC and, be a real contender? You're going to have to get more 5-stars. And when you want to land 5-stars, you're going to have to outbid some of these other big programs for these big time players. You have to build depth, and you have to build that depth with as much talent as possible. And for programs like Kentucky, yeah, if you want to get those kids, you have to use NIL. And he's basically telling a fan base that we know cares, right? Because of Kentucky basketball, those people love Kentucky sports. Hey, if you ever want to beat Georgia, this is what we have to do. So I think it was more of a message to that instead of taking a shot necessarily at Kirby and Georgia, because there are a lot of programs who are spending a lot more money on NIL to get kids than Georgia is. They'll play that game to a certain extent, but there are other programs, as we've written about and what we're hearing, that are just doing everything they can. I mean, they are really testing the limits of what they can do to get these players. And Mark Stoops has, I think, had enough, and he wants to get in on that and get some of these 5-stars that can help them reach the next level as far as the football program goes.
Yeah, I didn't really see it as necessarily a shot at Georgia. I mean, if anything, he sounded a little salty. I mean, just because you're coming off of a big time loss, you off of a huge win, you enter into a big loss. But I mean, yeah, they could play that ball game too. But like you said, Georgia doesn't just rely on NIL to get these guys. That's not the only avenue of getting some of these players. But Zion Logue last night, everyone got asked about it last night about Mark Stoops' comment. His answer was the best. It was, look, everybody's doing it to an extent, but you got to execute on Saturdays. And look, Georgia's obviously got the talent, but I mean, there are tons of schools across the country that, Georgia's got more talent than probably everybody, but there are other schools that have similar talent levels when you look at like a Michigan or Ohio State, stuff like that. So it's not just Georgia, but yeah, I mean, if Kentucky wants to it feels like they've been here for so long and they haven't been able to take just one step forward. And if that's, using NIL and buying players, then they need to do that.
Well, we'll see what Kentucky can do in the future. I'm not certain that they'll really be able to climb the ladder past the Dogs, but Mark Stoops, this is a lot of intramural stuff at Kentucky. And you're checking our EcoPoly chair right now. This is one of several models, thousands of combinations. This one's in red. Obviously, if you wanted Kentucky blue, you wanted multicolor, red with white, blue with white, whatever, make sure you're checking out EcoPoly. There are buddies down there in the heart of Georgia. They're manufacturing all of this in the state, and they've got a lot to offer y'all. The link is down below. But at Kentucky, there is a real, and we've seen this bubble up in the surface with Stoops and Calipari. There is a frustration, as Ryan was saying, about how the Cats are getting to a particular point and they're not going past that now. And for years, Kentucky was basically just waiting around to get to basketball season. Well, that's not the case anymore. I mean, you go beat Penn State. You've beaten the Gators more often than not. They've had success against Tennessee, Vanderbilt, everybody in the league except probably Georgia, Alabama, and maybe LSU. I don't know what their record is lately with LSU, but this is an intramural squabble that's going on right now, and I think what I would call the fact is that Kentucky, with Stoops, is a very good program. They're not an elite program, but they have, to me, elevated themselves to the top part of the East. It may be really tricky moving forward for them, Matt, just because of how hard the league's going to be, but it's going to be hard for everybody. But this is as much about, Stoops saying, hey, man, y'all see what we do, this athletic department does with basketball and putting all the resources towards basketball, what we can do. And he's saying, we don't even have all of that. And look at all we're doing in football. And, what could we do if we had all the resources? Kentucky, one last thing, Matt. Kentucky, if you go up there, it is they care. You can tell they have changed more than almost anybody that I've covered in the last 25 years. South Carolina too, but Kentucky more. Their baseball, they've done a brand new stadium. Everything is brand new up there. They've renamed Commonwealth. Everything's new except Rupp, which is kind of a dump. But they're even trying to do that, and that's complicated because of the city and the state and the school. But they can't quite get there. I did not take it as a shot, Matt, but I think what he's saying is kind of true, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I think you have to give him a lot of credit for putting this program where it is. I mean, they have enough.
God, no question.
To beat Florida and to beat South Carolina and Tennessee. They got to that point, and I think Mark is sitting here saying, hey, I'm doing everything I can to continue to elevate this program. Now I need a little more help. We're contenders in the East, but now you're bringing in Texas and Oklahoma in the mix too. It's going to make things even harder to possibly maybe win an SEC title, which seems crazy. But to Mark Stoops, that's his job, is to get that program as high as it can go. And he's saying, hey, I mean, I can only do so much with the players. We just lost by 40 to the Dogs, who bullied us for 4 quarters. I need more help. I need more resources. I need better players. And with your help, we can get there. But it seems like he's a little frustrated right now because he is a really good coach. And I think they've kind of plateaued where they are, which is very respectable. I mean, they are a tough out for most teams. They're not an easy check on the schedule like they used to be. He wants to get them to that next level, and he knows it's going to take NIL to do that.
It's a part of it now. And like you said, it's more legal. Does it make it easier or harder for a place like Kentucky now that the NIL ball game exists? Does that make it harder for them to get some of these players just because they're not dealing with the funds? I don't think it's that much different than it was before. I think that this is just kind of a way around some of the illegal activity. And it's not really about that. It's about getting the athletes money that I think, to an extent they deserve it. But it's just what it is. There are other ways to do it though. Transfer portal, like they went and got Ray Davis from Vanderbilt, right? I mean, they've got to do it. But it feels like their ceiling is just number 2 in the East. I mean, that's just where they've stopped at. And one of you said winning the SEC East would be first. Now the divisions are out of the way, but it's tougher sledding, I think, starting next year for a team like Kentucky in the conference.
In the league, it's harder. Yeah. However, I will say this to the two of y'all. If you are Mark Stoops, this 12-game playoff is a really good thing, Matt. They can get into the playoff. Now, they couldn't get into the 4-game. They can get into the 12-game. And if I'm Stoops, all I'm saying is, all right, we may lose twice in the East, or we may lose to Texas and Georgia, but we beat Oklahoma and we beat the Gators and all this stuff, and we're clean otherwise. We're 10-2. We belong in the playoff. And they might have a really big argument next year. They might have to travel to Ohio State, but man, those Kentucky fans would salivate at just going up about 3 hours north and playing Ohio State. They'd love that.
Yeah, I think it was 2019 where Georgia went up to Lexington and the East was on the line
18,
late in the year.
Yep,
18. So I think they were a top 12 team at the end of the year. I mean, they could have been in the playoff that year if there was one. I see Dean getting out, checking the numbers for me, and I appreciate that. But he's got a good quarterback coming in. They've got a solid 4-star guy, but it's a team thing. Yes, you have to have a quarterback if you want to make a run. especially and maybe you win a game in the playoff. But if I were to sit off the top of my head and name the programs that are doing the most with NIL right now and going kind of above and beyond, Kentucky's nowhere near that list.
Right.
They're not near Miami, Florida State, South Carolina, Auburn, these teams that are going all in through NIL to make their program better. And Kentucky is not a team I hear about, as far as, high school and recruiting and what they're doing, trying to bring in kids. Like Ryan said, they do a great job in the transfer portal, but there's still more that needs to be done for Mark Stoops and that Kentucky program to get where they want to be. They're at a respectable level, but they want to get better than that and keep improving. And it has to be NIL if they want to get to that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think we know pretty well that it matters a lot for some of these high schoolers how many dollars they can get. How much can they just kind of rip away from these schools? They're not stealing money, but it matters to a lot of these players, and they're just going to have to fork up the money. I don't know what their deal is with basketball, if that's something they've done for a long time and they've dominated in that area. If that's the case, just they got to dip their toe in football. Basketball is always going to matter more up there, but if they want to compete in football the way they have competed in basketball in the past, because it hasn't been so hot recently, they've got to play that game too.
So they got to play the game in basketball as well. Kentucky basketball is not what it used to be. Shocker. And, but I will say this for the Cats. Lately, they've gotten a lot of ranked wins, sometimes top 10 wins. They beat top 10 Florida in 2021. They beat Iowa, Penn State. Tennessee has been their real... that has been the game for them that they just kind of cannot seem to get around, more so than any other game. But I think in terms of what was said about Georgia, I'll close it with this, Matt. Georgia doesn't really ball out at NIL quite the way that I think they could, and the question becomes, will they in the near future? And if they don't, is that going to affect them over time? I think it's a legitimate question.
Matt, you muted yourself.
Matt is muted, which may be
unmute.
What are
we're good?
There we go.
No,
go ahead.
Fisher was saying hi earlier, so I muted myself. But
Fisher Wednesday, man.
Yeah, if Georgia wants a kid badly enough, they'll do what it takes to get that kid.
But they didn't do that. Wait a second. The three of us know that that's not totally true. Because of one instance, I'm not going to be real specific here.
Right. But I still think they could have gone to
and they still can get that person,
and they still can. But they're not gonna. It's not a real bidding war. It's correct. With other. Yeah. They're gonna do what it takes because a lot of these kids, it's almost everything that goes into it. And I know the Georgia staff is showing them the wall when they go through Buttsmeer. Hey, look at all these first-round picks. We can get you this NFL money down the road a little bit if you come here and develop and, work hard and compete like we want you to. That's what the Georgia program's about. But they know NIL is important and they use it too. Like you said, Dean, it's not at this crazy level that I'm hearing about other programs.